May I continue? The most seductive words ever whispered. When the silver-haired millionaire uttered this phrase, the innocent young woman never imagined how her fate would change forever. What unspoken secrets does this powerful man hide? And why is his proposal as irresistible as it is tempting? Where in the world are you watching from today? If you want to discover how a simple question can trigger passion, betrayal, and redemption, subscribe now and leave a like to dive into the scandal that's shocking everyone. Rain violently pelted against the windows of the elegant ballroom when Octavia spilled red wine on the immaculate tuxedo of the most powerful man in the city. The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes turned to the young waitress of barely 22, with her trembling hands and brown eyes wide with panic. But instead of the expected explosion of anger, he simply whispered those words that would echo in her mind for the next 18 months. May I continue? Fate, that capricious painter, sometimes draws with a single gesture the lines that will define the rest of the canvas of our lives. That March evening, the New York air mingled with the scent of lavender that Octavia always carried with her, a gift from her grandmother from Virginia, and the perfume of white roses decorating the exclusive event at the Plaza Hotel. The young woman moved through the hall with trays of French champagne, trying to go unnoticed among the formally dressed guests. Her chestnut hair, pulled back in a tight bun, revealed a few rebellious freckles on her nape, small constellations that drew a map as intricate as her own destiny. Thaddeus Winters, a 43-year-old man with perfectly combed salt-and-pepper hair and blue eyes that seemed to contain the entire Atlantic, observed the scene from his table. His long, elegant fingers played distractedly with the crystal glass, while his eyes discreetly followed the young waitress, who moved gracefully among the guests. The accident occurred when Octavia, distracted by a biting comment from another waitress, stumbled slightly, tilting the tray just enough for a glass of red wine to spill onto Thaddeus's impeccable tuxedo. The crimson liquid spread like a bloodstain on the immaculate fabric. I'm so sorry, sir," Octavia stammered, her cheeks burning as she awkwardly tried to clean the stain with a napkin. "Please, allow me to—" "May I continue?" he interrupted with a calm, almost musical voice. Octavia raised her eyes, confused. Thaddeus's eyes showed not a trace of anger, but a serene curiosity, almost complicit. It was as if in that brief exchange of glances, something invisible yet powerful had been woven between them. "Excuse me," she asked, not understanding. "May I continue with my evening, miss?" he clarified with a barely perceptible smile. "This stain gives me character, don't you think?" A nervous laugh escaped Octavia's lips as the event manager hurried over, profusely apologizing. Thaddeus raised a hand, stopping the torrent of excuses. "It was an accident. There's no damage that a good dry cleaner can't fix," he said, with a calm authority that admitted no reply. "Please, no one is to trouble the young lady about this." When Octavia moved away, her legs still trembling from the incident, she couldn't imagine that this man had memorized every detail of her face, nor that the next day he would order his assistant to find out everything about the young waitress with the scent of lavender, who had stained his tuxedo and, unknowingly, his heart as well. Octavia's small apartment in Brooklyn was an ordered chaos of canvases, brushes, and mixed smells. The dawn light filtered through the studio's only window, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air like tiny stars. On a worn easel rested her latest work, an unfinished portrait of an elderly woman with a child's eyes, inspired by her grandmother, Elaine. "Someday, Grandma," she whispered as she cleaned her brushes, "someday my paintings will hang in galleries where I now only serve drinks." The apartment, barely 400 square feet, was a perfect reflection of her life's duality. The dining table also served as a desk for her fine art studies. The small kitchen housed both worn pots and pigment jars, and on the only bookshelf, art books shared space with protocol manuals for waitstaff. Octavia prepared coffee while mentally reviewing her schedule. Classes in the morning, internship at the restoration workshop in the afternoon, and at night, another event as a waitress. She would sleep barely 4 hours, but every dollar earned brought her a little closer to her dream of studying in Boston. The ring of the telephone interrupted her thoughts. It was Penelope, her best friend since childhood. "Did you hear?" Penelope's excited voice resonated from the other end of the line. "Everyone's talking about what happened last night at the plaza." "Please, Penny, don't remind me," Octavia groaned, sinking into her only comfortable chair. "I thought they'd fire me on the spot. Well, it turns out you spilled wine on Thaddeus Winters, no less, the man who practically owns half of Manhattan. And the strangest thing is, according to my cousin who works at the hotel, he asked about you this morning." Octavia felt her heart quicken. "Asked about me? What for? To request that I be fired?" "On the contrary," Penelope replied with a mysterious tone. "He wanted to know your full name. Just that." For the rest of the day, while mixing colors in her painting techniques class, Octavia's mind constantly wandered to those blue eyes and the strange calmness with which he had reacted to the accident. There was something about that man, an elegant and contained solitude that resonated with her own. That night, returning home after her shift at a restaurant in the city center, she noticed a thick, creamy envelope slipped under her door. No return address, just her name written in impeccable handwriting. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope. A soft aroma of bergamot and sandalwood emanated from the paper, caressing her senses. Inside, a card with gold edges contained a brief note. "Miss Octavia Reed, I would like to invite you to dinner this Friday at my residence to discuss a matter that could be of mutual interest. Her car will come to pick you up at 8 p.m., should you decide to accept. Sincerely, Thaddeus Winters." Alongside the card was a small golden key with an engraved number. Under the light of her lamp, Octavia examined it in confusion, wondering what door it would open and why this man, who could hire any established artist, would be interested in a student who could barely pay her rent. What she couldn't know then was that this small golden key would not only open a physical door, but the portal to a life she had never imagined. Thaddeus's mansion on the Upper East Side was an impressive building with modern lines that integrated harmoniously with the gardens surrounding it. As the black Mercedes passed through the entrance gate, Octavia suddenly became conscious of her simple dress, the only one she considered appropriate for a formal dinner, and her hands, slightly stained with oil paint that no soap had completely removed. The driver, a man with an impassive face, opened the door for her and guided her through a path lined with white roses whose perfume filled the night air. Each step on the perfectly placed stones increased her nervousness. An older woman with her hair in a severe bun and kind eyes greeted her at the entrance. "Miss Reed, welcome. I'm Winifred, the housekeeper," she said with a serene voice that contrasted with the tension Octavia felt. "Mr. Winters awaits you in the inner garden." Following Winifred through corridors decorated with artwork that Octavia recognized as priceless pieces, they reached an open space in the center of the house, a courtyard with a marble fountain and walls covered with jasmine and bougainvillea. Seated at an elegantly set table, Thaddeus rose when he saw her. He wore an immaculate white shirt and dark trousers. The simplicity of his attire contrasted with the opulence of the setting, as if to communicate that true elegance resides in the essential. "Miss Reed, I'm glad you accepted my invitation," he said, approaching to greet her. "You can call me Octavia," she responded, surprised by the firmness of her own voice. "And I must confess I'm curious to know what someone like you might want from me." A smile briefly crossed Thaddeus's face. Direct and honest. "I like that," he commented, inviting her to sit. "But first, let's have dinner. Important conversations are always better after a good meal, don't you think?" The dinner, served on fine china atop a glass and wrought iron table, consisted of simple but exquisitely prepared dishes. During the meal, Thaddeus surprised her with questions about her studies, her paintings, her dreams. He spoke with the attention of someone who truly listens, not someone waiting for their turn to speak. "I've seen your work," he said finally as dessert was being served. "You have extraordinary talent, Octavia." She almost choked on the sip of wine she had just taken. "My work? How?" "I have contacts at the university," he explained naturally. "After our incident at the plaza, I was curious. Your professors speak wonders of your potential, but they also mention your precarious financial situation. I know you dream of studying in Boston." "You've been investigating me?" Octavia asked, divided between indignation and a strange sense of flattery. "I prefer to call it interest," he replied, leaning back in his chair. "You see, Octavia, I've been looking for someone with your artistic sensibility for some time. I have a proposal for you." He stood and extended his hand to her. "Will you accompany me?" He led her through the house to a closed door. With a gesture, he indicated that she should use the small golden key he had sent with the invitation. When Octavia opened the door, she couldn't contain an exclamation of amazement. Before her stretched the most perfect art studio she could have imagined. Large windows that would allow natural light to flood the space during the day. Shelves filled with art books, easels of different sizes, and most impressive, tables covered with materials of the highest quality, many of which she had only seen in catalogues. "This space has been waiting for someone to give it life for years," said Thaddeus, observing her reaction. "My proposal is simple, Octavia. I want to fully finance your studies in Boston. Meanwhile, this studio will be yours to develop your work. In exchange, I only ask for your occasional company at social events and perhaps some conversation about art during dinners." Octavia stared at him, looking for deception in his eyes. "Why me? There are thousands of more talented and experienced artists who would be willing to accept your offer." Thaddeus approached one of the windows, contemplating the garden illuminated by the moon. His profile stood out against the night like a figure from another time. "Because when you spilled wine on my tuxedo, I saw something in your eyes that I recognize well. Hunger. Not just for success or recognition, but to create, to express something that cannot be contained." He turned to her. "And because, although you may not believe it, sometimes the most powerful people are the loneliest. Your sincerity is refreshing in my world." "It sounds like an agreement too advantageous for me," said Octavia, scanning the studio with her gaze. "What do you really gain?" Thaddeus smiled, but this time the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's say I'm trying to compensate for past mistakes," he answered, with a voice that for the first time revealed a crack in his perfect composure. "So, do you accept?" At that moment, while the aroma of new oils and virgin drawing paper filled her senses, Octavia felt she was at a crossroads that would define the rest of her life. The answer she gave at that instant would open or close doors she didn't even know existed. "It's absolute madness," Penelope declared, tapping her teaspoon against the edge of her coffee cup. "A millionaire offers you a studio and studies in Boston in exchange for... what exactly?" "Nobody gives anything for free, Tavi. Nobody." They were sitting on the terrace of a small cafe near the hospital, where Penelope was doing her nursing internship. The midday sun gently warmed the metal table, creating small glints on the steel spoons. "I don't know, Penny," Octavia sighed, absent-mindedly drawing circles on the paper napkin. "He says he just wants my occasional company, someone to talk about art with." "Please, and you believe that?" Penelope rolled her eyes. "Men like him don't look for intellectual companionship in 22-year-old girls who stain their expensive suits. They look for trophies, or worse." Octavia observed an elderly couple eating in silence at the adjacent table. Despite not exchanging words, there was an intimacy in their gestures, in the way he moved the salt shaker closer before she asked for it, in how their gazes briefly met above their plates. "There's something about him, Penny," Octavia murmured. "A loneliness I recognize, as if he carried an invisible weight on his shoulders." "Now you're a psychologist?" Penelope softened her tone. "I'm just worried about you. You know what they say. If something seems too good to be true." "It probably is," Octavia completed. "But it's also the only opportunity I have to study in Boston. You've seen how my mother is, increasingly hunched over from sewing 10 hours a day. I don't want that future, Penny." Penelope extended her hand across the table and squeezed her friend's. "Just promise me one thing. At the first sign that something isn't right, you'll run. And you'll call me no matter the time." "I promise," Octavia replied, silently grateful for her friend's concern. That afternoon, Octavia visited the studio for the first time as her new workspace. Winifred gave her a set of keys and a cell phone, "So the master can contact you directly," the housekeeper explained in a tone that revealed nothing. Alone in that perfect space, Octavia caressed the new brushes, uncapped tubes of oil paint that released intense and promising fragrances, leafed through technique books she could never have afforded. With each discovery, guilt and doubt mingled with an almost childlike excitement. She placed a blank canvas on one of the easels. The immaculate surface seemed to look at her, expectant, like an unasked question. What would she paint on this first canvas? What story deserved to inaugurate this new chapter? Without thinking too much, her hands began to trace the lines of a face, Blue eyes under thick eyebrows, a firm mouth capable of smiling, grey hair combed back. She stopped abruptly upon realizing she was painting Thaddeus. Frustrated, she covered the sketch with furious strokes, transforming it into a mass of confused colors. She was about to abandon it when the phone Winifred had given her rang for the first time. "Hello," she answered nervously. "How do you find your new studio, Miss Reed?" Thaddeus's voice sounded distant, as if calling from another country. "It's perfect," she admitted, observing the color blotch she had created. "Too perfect, perhaps." "Is there such a thing as excessive perfection?" he asked with genuine curiosity. "In art, yes. Perfection can be the enemy of authentic expression," Octavia replied, surprising herself with her own audacity. "Sometimes it's precisely the imperfections that give a work its personality." A brief silence followed by a soft laugh. "An important lesson that many take too long to learn," he said finally. "I'll be out of the country for 2 weeks. Use that time to familiarize yourself with the studio. Winifred will attend to any needs you have. And, Octavia, yes? Don't judge yourself too harshly. The first canvas is always the most difficult." When the call ended, Octavia stared at the phone, wondering how he knew she was struggling with her first work in the studio. Were there cameras? The idea gave her a chill. She examined the walls and ceiling but found nothing suspicious. She returned to the easel and contemplated the color blotch she had created. Tilting her head, she began to distinguish forms in the chaos, perhaps a stormy landscape or a state of mind. With renewed determination, she took a clean brush and began to work with what she had, transforming the error into a new direction. As she painted, a phrase resonated in her mind. "Sometimes it's precisely the imperfections that give a work its personality." Perhaps this was applicable not only to art, but also to people and to unlikely agreements like the one she had just accepted. Time acquired a strange rhythm for Octavia during the following weeks. The days were divided between her university classes, increasingly stimulating now that she could afford all the necessary materials, and the hours in the studio, where her confidence grew with each completed canvas. The nights, on the other hand, passed in a succession of social events where she accompanied Thaddeus: art galleries, charity dinners, private concerts. To her surprise, these events turned out to be less uncomfortable than she had feared. Thaddeus introduced her simply as a promising artist or my guest, and never demanded from her more than her presence and occasional conversations. Never an inappropriate gesture, never an insinuation that would confirm Penelope's fears. That Sunday afternoon, while organizing the art books she had been consulting in the studio, she received a message from Thaddeus. "If you've finished your work, I'd like to show you something." "I'm in the main library." The library was one of the few rooms in the mansion that Octavia had not yet visited. Following Winifred's directions, she traversed corridors decorated with antiques until she reached a pair of dark wooden double doors. Upon entering, the aroma of leather, old paper, and noble wood enveloped her like an embrace. Bookshelves reaching to the ceiling covered every wall, interrupted only by large windows that let in the golden light of the afternoon. In the center, atop a Persian rug in ochre and blue tones, 2 reading armchairs flanked a low table where several open books rested. Thaddeus stood by one of the windows, contemplating the garden. Hearing her enter, he turned with a smile that seemed genuinely pleased. "Octavia, thank you for coming. Would you like some tea?" Winifred prepared it with fresh mint from the garden. "Yes, thank you," she replied, approaching the books on the table with curiosity. "What did you want to show me?" Thaddeus poured 2 cups from a porcelain teapot and offered her one. "I've been reviewing some catalogues of past exhibitions in Boston," he explained, indicating the books. "I thought you might be interested in seeing the type of work they're selecting lately for new talents." Octavia sat in one of the armchairs and began to leaf through the catalogues with genuine interest. Thaddeus settled across from her, observing her reactions attentively. "Your technique is comparable to that of many of these artists," he commented after a while. "With proper training in Boston, I have no doubt you'll soon have your own space in these catalogues." "That's kind of you to say," Octavia responded, blushing slightly. "But I still have a long way to go. Humility is a virtue, but underestimating oneself is a flaw," he replied, taking a sip of tea. "I've seen how you've progressed these weeks. Your series on traditional crafts has an uncommon narrative force. They talked for almost an hour about art, current trends, and the masters they both admired. The conversation flowed with a naturalness that Octavia had never experienced with anyone else, not even with her university classmates. While looking for a specific catalogue that Thaddeus mentioned, Octavia approached one of the bookshelves. A volume bound in dark green leather caught her attention. Contemporary Portuguese poetry. When she tried to pull it out, the book resisted slightly, as if something was blocking it from behind. When she finally extracted it, a photograph slid from between its pages, falling silently onto the rug. Octavia bent down to pick it up, and what she saw momentarily took her breath away. A young woman of about 20, with features astonishingly similar to her own, the same large eyes, the same shape of nose, even a similar expression in her gaze, smiling next to a younger Thaddeus, both in front of what appeared to be the entrance to an art academy. The faint aroma of lavender emanating from the photograph was the same that Thaddeus had given her in a carved crystal bottle weeks earlier, asking her to wear it because it reminded him of someone special. With her heart beating rapidly, Octavia turned to Thaddeus, who had visibly paled upon seeing the photograph in her hands. "Who is she?" Octavia asked with a trembling voice, feeling that all the pieces were beginning to fit into a disturbing puzzle. "And why does she look so much like me?" Thaddeus rose slowly, as if each movement cost him a superhuman effort. He approached her, and with delicacy took the photograph from her trembling hands. "Her name is Eleanor," he finally answered, his voice barely a whisper. "My daughter." The silence that followed that revelation seemed to have its own weight, as if the air in the library had solidified between them. Octavia felt the walls narrowing, the thousands of books around her observing her, judging her naivety. "Your daughter," she finally repeated, the words strange in her mouth. "The one you've never mentioned in all our conversations." Thaddeus returned to his armchair and sat with a gesture of defeat, the photograph still between his fingers. For the first time since she had known him, Octavia saw his facade of perfect control crumble. "It's been 5 years since I've heard anything from her," he confessed, his gaze fixed on the image. "She left one night, leaving only a brief note. 'I can't be who you want me to be,' it said. 'Since then, I've hired private investigators, pulled strings. Nothing. It's as if the earth had swallowed her.' And that's why you sought me out?" Octavia's voice trembled between indignation and pain. "Because of my resemblance to her. Am I a replacement?" Thaddeus raised his eyes, bright with contained tears. "No, it's not that simple," he replied. "When I saw your paintings, your talent, they reminded me so much of hers." Eleanor also dreamed of studying art in Boston. He rose abruptly and approached a piece of dark wood furniture. After entering a combination into a hidden lock, he extracted a folder that he spread on the table. "These are her sketches. The last ones she made before leaving." Octavia examined them with trembling hands. They were masterful drawings, urban landscapes, portraits, studies of hands and expressions. But what impacted her most was recognizing in them a style surprisingly similar to her own. The same tendency to emphasize shadows, the same way of capturing light in faces. "Why did she leave?" asked Octavia, feeling a strange connection with this unknown woman who shared not only her appearance, but also her artistic vision. Thaddeus passed a hand over his face, as if trying to erase the accumulated fatigue of years. "Because I refused to support her art studies," he confessed bitterly. "I, who collect art, who surround myself with beauty, denied my own daughter the opportunity to create. I wanted her to study business, to prepare to inherit all this." He made a gesture encompassing the mansion. "We had a terrible argument the night before her scheduled trip to Boston. I told her unforgivable things about how impractical her dreams were. The next morning she was gone." Octavia felt the initial anger transforming into something more complex, a mixture of compassion and bewilderment. "And when you saw me that night at the plaza," she began, "it was as if fate offered me a second chance," he completed. "Not to replace Eleanor, but to not make the same mistake twice, to help someone with the same dream that I took from her." Octavia stood up, needing to put physical distance between herself and that revelation that altered everything she thought she knew. "Why didn't you tell me from the beginning?" she asked, approaching the window. "Would you have believed me? Wouldn't you have thought it was a fabricated story to manipulate you?" Thaddeus approached, maintaining a respectful distance. "Or worse yet, Wouldn't you have felt that any achievement of yours would always be in the shadow of my guilt?" Octavia remained silent, knowing he was right. She turned slowly toward him. "The lavender perfume," she murmured. "It was her favorite," confirmed Thaddeus. "I'm sorry for asking you to wear it." It was a moment of weakness. The afternoon light had faded, leaving the library in a half-light interrupted only by a few table lamps. In that half-light, truths seemed easier to pronounce, confessions less painful. "And now what?" Octavia finally asked. "What do you expect from me?" Thaddeus approached a small desk and extracted a large envelope. "This is for you, regardless of what you decide after today." Inside the envelope, Octavia found documents for a bank account in her name, with a sum that left her breathless, enough to study in Boston for years, and the official acceptance from the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. "I don't want your money," she said, trying to return the envelope to him. "It's not my money," he replied firmly. "It's an investment in your talent. Accept it as a scholarship if that makes you feel better, but don't reject it out of pride. The world deserves to see your art, Octavia." She examined the documents, divided between the indignation of knowing herself, in a way, used, and the understanding of the pain that had led this man to act as he did. "I need time to think," she finally said, putting the papers back in the envelope. "All this is too much." "I understand," Thaddeus nodded. "Take all the time you need. The studio will continue to be yours without conditions or expectations." As Octavia was heading toward the door, Thaddeus added in a low voice, "There's something else you should know. Before leaving, Eleanor left something for me, besides the note. A kind of artistic testament. She expressed her wish that even though we had grown apart, I would find a way to help other young artists realize their dreams. It seems that, even in her pain, she knew me better than I knew myself. She knew that someday I would regret it." Octavia stopped, her hand on the doorknob. "If you ever find her," she said without turning, "tell her that her drawings are beautiful." As she left the library, Octavia felt that something fundamental had changed, not only in her relationship with Thaddeus, but in her understanding of how lives sometimes intertwine in inexplicable ways, of how the mistakes of some shape the opportunities of others. And for the first time since she had accepted the deal, she didn't feel guilt for the privileges received, but a strange responsibility toward that unknown woman whose void she had somehow been called to fill. The missing daughter. Seriously. Penelope opened her eyes so wide that Octavia feared they might pop out of their sockets. "This already sounds like a soap opera, Tavi." They were sitting in a secluded corner of a cafe near Central Park. Octavia had chosen this place for its discretion. The tables separated by bamboo screens offered the privacy she needed to share the revelations of the last few days. "I know, I thought it was a made-up story at first too," admitted Octavia, absently crumbling a croissant she had barely tasted. "But then I saw more photographs, documents. It's real, Penny. He has a daughter who looks astonishingly like me, and who disappeared 5 years ago." Penelope took a sip of her latte, processing the information. "And what are you going to do now?" she finally asked. "I don't know," Octavia sighed. "On one hand, I feel used, like I'm a consolation prize, a living reminder of his failure as a father. On the other, is it so bad that he wants to redeem himself by helping me? His motives may be questionable, but the opportunity is real. The question is whether you can live with it," reflected Penelope. "Accepting his help, knowing that, in part, he's doing it because you remind him of his lost daughter." The conversation was interrupted when Octavia noticed an elegant woman at the adjacent table observing them with too much interest. When their gazes crossed, the woman quickly looked away, but Octavia had the unmistakable sensation that she had been listening. "Let's talk about something else," she whispered to Penelope. "I think we have an audience." They changed to trivial topics, but the discomfort persisted. As they left the cafe, Octavia was certain that the woman was following them with her gaze. The following days passed in a strange normality. Octavia continued working in the studio, but avoided meeting with Thaddeus, who respected her distance by sending her only brief messages to ensure she had everything she needed. One afternoon, while waiting for the bus to return to her apartment after classes, she noticed a man who seemed to be photographing her discreetly from a car. When she tried to approach to confront him, the vehicle drove away precipitously. The incident repeated itself 2 days later, this time near the studio. Alarmed, Octavia decided to speak with Winifred, the only person in the mansion in whom she felt she could trust. "Do you think someone is following me, Winifred?" she asked, as the woman served her tea in the kitchen, a space that, despite its professional equipment, maintained a welcoming air. Winifred sat across from her, her wrinkled hands smoothing a kitchen cloth with a mechanical gesture. "Miss Octavia, there are things you should know," she said in a low voice, as if fearing the walls had ears. "Mr. Winters is not just a wealthy man with a missing daughter. His situation is complicated." "What do you mean?" "His ex-wife, Eleanor's mother, is Diana Blackwood of Blackwood Vineyards," explained Winifred. "The divorce was turbulent. One of the agreements stipulated that if he began a serious relationship before 5 years had passed, he would lose control of several joint companies. Her family, especially her brother Malcolm, has been waiting for any opportunity to harm him." Octavia felt a chill run down her spine. "You think they believe that Thaddeus and I—" "What I think doesn't matter," Winifred replied firmly. "But I've seen unknown cars watching the entrance, and I receive calls where no one speaks on the other end. And now you tell me they've photographed you." That night, Octavia couldn't sleep. The pieces fit together in a disturbing way. The woman in the cafe, the furtive photographs, the tension she had noticed in Winifred. Had she involuntarily become the center of a war between ex-spouses? Was her presence endangering Thaddeus's business empire? Her phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. Upon opening it, she felt the air leave her lungs. It was a photograph of her entering the mansion, followed by another of her leaving the studio with Thaddeus. The text accompanying them was brief but threatening. "Ask your patron how much he's willing to lose for you. Young mistresses always come at a high price." With trembling hands, Octavia called Thaddeus. When he answered, his voice sounded concerned. "Octavia, are you all right? It's late." "Someone sent me photographs of us," she said without preamble, with a rather explicit message about what they believe is between us. "Winifred told me about your divorce agreement." A dense silence filled the line. "I'm coming over," he said finally. "Don't open the door to anyone." When he arrived at her apartment, Thaddeus seemed to have aged years in a few hours. He sat heavily in the only armchair in the small living room, while Octavia showed him the message. "I'm so sorry," he said, running a hand through his hair with a tired gesture. "I never thought they would involve you in this. Malcolm, Diana's brother, has been trying to wrest control of the joint companies from me for years. Seeing you enter and leave my house regularly must have seemed the perfect opportunity to him." "But there's nothing between us," protested Octavia. "That doesn't matter," Thaddeus replied bitterly. "The clause in the agreement is ambiguous enough. They only need photographs that suggest a relationship to initiate a legal process that could last years." Octavia sat across from him, feeling that the dream she had begun to build was crumbling before her eyes. "What can we do?" Thaddeus looked at her for a long time, as if weighing painful alternatives. "I have to distance you from this," he said finally. "The money for your studies is already in your account. It's irrevocable. Use the studio as long as you need to prepare for your trip to Boston, but perhaps it's better if we limit our contact for a while." The proposal made sense. It was the most practical. And yet Octavia felt a pang of sadness that she hadn't anticipated. In these weeks, despite the strange circumstances of their agreement, she had developed a genuine affection for this complex man, so powerful and yet so vulnerable. "What if what they're seeking is precisely to separate us?" she asked suddenly. "Maybe Malcolm knows you're financing my studies, that you're fulfilling Eleanor's wish to help young artists. Maybe he wants to prevent that too." Thaddeus looked at her in surprise, as if he hadn't considered that possibility. "You're more perceptive than I thought," he admitted. "It's possible. Malcolm always hated the close relationship I had with Eleanor during her childhood. It bothered him that, despite my long work hours, I always found time to take her to museums and galleries." A reflective silence settled between them as the night advanced and the city lights drew changing patterns on the walls of the small apartment. "I have an idea," Octavia finally said, with a determination that surprised even herself. "If they're going to fabricate a scandal, let's give them a real reason to talk, but on our terms." The annual reception of the New York Contemporary Art Foundation was one of the most prestigious events on the American social calendar. Held at the Museum of Modern Art, it brought together collectors, established artists, critics, and patrons under the light filtered through its impressive structure of concrete and glass. Octavia contemplated her reflection in the full-length mirror of the dressing room. The black designer dress, personally chosen by Winifred, fit her figure perfectly, enhancing her silhouette with a sober elegance that contrasted with the elaborate styling of her hair. The pearl earrings, a loan from Winifred's personal collection, completed a look far removed from the art student who used to serve drinks at these events. "You look beautiful," said Winifred, adjusting a final detail of the dress. "But nervous. Remember to breathe." "I'm not sure this plan is a good idea," confessed Octavia. "What if we make things worse?" Winifred took her hands in her own, the maternal gesture contrasting with the formality of her uniform. "Sometimes confronting gossip directly is the only way to diffuse it," she replied with the wisdom of someone who had seen too much in her years of service. "Mr. Winters knows what he's doing, and so do you." The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Instead of hiding, Octavia would attend as Thaddeus's official guest at the season's most important event. There he would openly present her as his artistic protégé, publicly explaining his patronage program and announcing Octavia's upcoming exhibition before her departure for Boston. They would put their cards on the table, eliminating the element of secrecy that fed the rumors. When the black Mercedes arrived at the MoMA entrance, dozens of photographers awaited the guests. Thaddeus, impeccable in his tuxedo, descended first and extended his hand to Octavia, who emerged from the vehicle with a grace she had rehearsed for days with Winifred's help. The flashes burst like small lightning bolts as they advanced along the red carpet. Octavia maintained the serene smile she had practiced, aware that each gesture would be analyzed for evidence of an inappropriate relationship. "You look stunning," murmured Thaddeus, his hand barely brushing Octavia's back to guide her. "And braver than I imagined." Inside, the space shone with strategically placed lights that enhanced the sculptures and paintings exhibited especially for the occasion. The cream of New York society moved among flutes of champagne and artificial conversations. Octavia immediately felt the gazes, the barely disguised whispers, the gestures of surprise at seeing her on Thaddeus's arm and not carrying a tray. She recognized several guests whom she had served at past events, now disconcerted by her new position. "Mr. Winters, what a pleasure to see you again." An elegant woman approached, her eyes quickly evaluating Octavia. "Won't you introduce us to your companion?" Thaddeus smiled with absolute tranquility. "Of course. Octavia Reed, an extraordinary artist whose career I'm sponsoring through my new foundation. Octavia, I present to you Margot Hayes, director of the Luminous Gallery." The woman extended a bejeweled hand to Octavia, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Foundation? I didn't know you had started a patronage project." "It's recent," replied Thaddeus. "Inspired by my daughter, actually. Octavia is the first beneficiary, but I plan to expand it to support more young talents." The deliberate mention of Eleanor provoked exactly the expected reaction. A flash of surprise in Margot's eyes, who clearly knew the family history. As the evening progressed, Thaddeus introduced Octavia to influential figures in the art world, repeatedly explaining the nature of their professional relationship and the details of the foundation. With each introduction, Octavia gained confidence, speaking passionately about her work and her projects in Boston. They were conversing with a renowned critic when Octavia saw her, Diana Blackwood, Thaddeus's ex-wife, an imposing woman with the same aristocratic bearing as her daughter in the photographs. At her side, a man with a severe expression who could only be Malcolm, her brother. "Thaddeus," said Diana, approaching with an icy smile, "what a surprise to see you accompanied. And by someone so young." The critic, sensing the tension, discreetly excused himself. "Diana Malcolm," Thaddeus greeted with a studied calmness. "Let me introduce you to Octavia Reed, the first artist sponsored by the Eleanor Winters Foundation." The name fell like a silent bomb. Diana visibly paled. "You named a foundation after our daughter?" she asked with a tense voice. "Without consulting me?" "It's a tribute to her passion for art," Thaddeus responded. "Something I should have supported when I had the opportunity." Malcolm stepped forward, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "And I'm to assume that this young lady is a beneficiary of your sudden generosity." His eyes traveled over Octavia with disdain. Curious coincidence that she resembles Eleanor so much, don't you think, Diana? Octavia felt the air becoming dense, the voices and music muffling. This was the moment for which they had prepared, and yet she felt paralyzed by the palpable hostility. "It's not a coincidence," intervened Thaddeus. "It was precisely that resemblance that made me reflect on my past mistakes, on how I failed our daughter by not supporting her artistic dreams." Diana now observed Octavia with a mixture of fascination and pain. "It's almost like seeing her again," she murmured. "She has the same eyes." "Mrs. Blackwood," Octavia finally found her voice, "I know this must seem strange, even disturbing to you, but I assure you that my relationship with Thaddeus is strictly professional. He's trying to do the right thing, what he should have done for Eleanor." Malcolm let out a dry laugh. "A touching story. Too bad we have photographs that suggest a much less professional relationship." "You mean the photographs your private investigators took from parked cars?" replied Octavia, with a courage she didn't know she possessed. "Photographs that only show an art student entering a studio and a patron supervising her work. Nothing more." Diana shot a penetrating look at her brother. "You hired private investigators, Malcolm, without consulting me?" "I did it for your own good, Diana," he responded, disconcerted by Octavia's intervention. "This man destroyed you once, and now he's trying to manipulate you again using Eleanor's memory." "What I'm trying to do," intervened Thaddeus, "is honor our daughter's wishes. I found her diary after she left. She wrote that, even though she was leaving, she hoped that someday I would use my resources to help other young people like her." Diana brought a hand to her chest, visibly affected. "You have her diary? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because every time I tried to contact you to talk about Eleanor, your lawyers blocked any communication that wasn't strictly necessary," Thaddeus replied sadly. "We both failed her, Diana. I for my obsession with business, you for your resentment toward me." A tense silence settled between them, while the other guests continued their evening, oblivious to the drama unfolding in their small circle. "I'd like to see that diary," Diana finally said, "and learn more about this foundation." "Of course," Thaddeus nodded, "whenever you wish." Malcolm, seeing how his plan was crumbling, took a step back. "This isn't over, Winters," he muttered, before moving away into the crowd. When Diana followed her brother, not without first directing a final, contemplative look at Octavia, Thaddeus exhaled slowly, as if he had been holding his breath throughout the conversation. "You were extraordinary," he said, discreetly taking Octavia's hand. "Your courage leaves me speechless." But Octavia didn't feel courage at that moment, rather a strange emptiness, as if she had played a role in a play whose script she didn't know. She had become a pawn in a family game that had been developing for years, a symbolic substitute for someone who perhaps didn't want to be found. "I need some air," she murmured, heading toward one of the side doors that led to the gardens. In the relative solitude of the terrace, under the starry New York sky, Octavia wondered if the price of her dreams wasn't too high, if, by accepting this deal, she hadn't lost something essential, her own identity, independent of Eleanor, of Thaddeus, of this entire story that wasn't hers. For the first time since she had spilled wine on that impeccable tuxedo, Octavia allowed herself to cry. Octavia's exhibition before her departure to Boston was inaugurated in a small but prestigious gallery in Soho. Her works, a series titled Reflections and Absences, explored the duality between the visible and the hidden, the empty spaces left by those who depart, and the echoes that endure in those who stay. The success was immediate and surprising. Critics who rarely paid attention to novice artists praised her technique and the emotional depth of her work. 3 of her paintings were sold on the first night, at prices Octavia could never have imagined. However, as she observed the attendees admiring her works, exchanging erudite comments about her use of chiaroscuro and toasting with flutes of sparkling wine, Octavia felt a growing unease. How many were there for her real talent, and how many out of curiosity, following the rumors that linked her to Thaddeus Winters? Was her success deserved, or simply the result of privileged connections? Thaddeus remained discreetly in the background during the inauguration, allowing Octavia to receive all the attention. Diana had also attended, an elegant and distant presence who observed the paintings with an indecipherable expression, especially those that unintentionally evoked Eleanor's absence. "Your technique reminds me of hers," Diana had commented upon greeting her, her words halfway between compliment and accusation. "You have the same way of capturing light in faces." 3 days after the inauguration, Octavia returned to the gallery to supervise some details before her imminent trip to Boston. The exhibition would continue for another month, but she would depart in just a week. Upon entering, she immediately felt that something wasn't right. The air seemed charged with an inexplicable tension. Bennett, the gallery owner, received her with an expression that tried to be professional, but didn't hide his concern. "Octavia, something unfortunate has happened," he said, guiding her to the main room. "Someone has damaged one of your works." The central painting of the exhibition, titled Absence in Blue, a self-portrait where Octavia appeared with her back to a blank canvas in a studio bathed in blue light, had been attacked. A clean cut traversed the canvas from side to side, as if executed with surgical precision. "When did it happen?" asked Octavia, feeling a mixture of horror and indignation at seeing her work destroyed. "This morning, during the security guard's shift change," explained Bennett. "We've reviewed the security cameras, but whoever did it knew the blind spots. The police have taken statements, but without witnesses or clear images." Octavia approached the wounded canvas. The cut didn't seem random or the product of vandalistic impulse. It was almost methodical, as if it wanted to specifically divide the figure of the artist from her blank canvas. "Have you informed Thaddeus?" she asked, gently touching the edge of the cut. "It was the first thing I did," replied Bennett. "He'll come as soon as he finishes a meeting. He asked me to assure you that the painting is insured. It can be restored, or if you prefer, you can create a new one." But Octavia knew it wasn't a matter of money or restoration. That attack was a message, a statement. Someone wanted to separate her from her work, to cut the link between the artist and her creation. "Malcolm," she murmured to herself, remembering the look of hatred from Diana's brother at the reception. When Thaddeus arrived, his face reflected a controlled fury that Octavia had never seen in him. "I'm so very sorry," he said, observing the damaged painting. "This is my fault. I've exposed you to the same pettiness that drove Eleanor away." "We don't know who it was," replied Octavia, though they both suspected the same person. "I know perfectly well," Thaddeus replied bitterly. "Malcolm has tried to sabotage every important project in my life since Diana and I separated. And now he's made you his new target." Octavia contemplated the cut canvas again, and something changed within her. The initial sadness transformed into determination. "I won't let them intimidate me," she said firmly. "If they want war, they'll have it. But on my terrain, with my weapons." She took the damaged painting and placed it in the center of the room, even more visible than before. Then she asked Bennett for a permanent marker. "What are you going to do?" asked Thaddeus, disconcerted. "Transform destruction into creation," she replied, writing directly on the torn canvas. "Art, like life, blooms even in wounds." She then signed with decision and added the date, converting the act of vandalism into an integral part of the work. "Now," she said, stepping back to contemplate the result, "whoever did this has involuntarily contributed to my work. They've completed it." Thaddeus observed her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Your response is brilliant, but I'm worried this will only inflame the situation further. Malcolm is dangerous when he feels challenged." "I leave for Boston in a week," Octavia responded. "Let him launch his petty attacks against my paintings if he wants, but they won't reach me there." That night, while packing her belongings in her small Brooklyn apartment, Octavia received a call from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering, fearing more threats. "Hello?" she finally responded. "Octavia Reed?" asked a female voice with a Boston accent. "My name is Imogen Fielding, from the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston. I've seen the images of your exhibition in New York, including the incident with your work." "How did you get my number?" asked Octavia, disconcerted. "Your gallery owner, Bennett, provided it to me," explained the woman. "You see, I'm organizing an exhibition titled Art and Resilience about works that have survived or been transformed after acts of vandalism or censorship. Your response to the attack against your painting was extraordinary, and I'd like to include that piece in the exhibition." Octavia slowly sat on the edge of her bed, processing what she had just heard. "You want to exhibit my damaged painting in Boston?" "Exactly," confirmed Imogen. "Sometimes wounds define us more than our moments of glory." Your way of incorporating the damage into the work, of transforming the attack into an artistic element, is precisely what I'm looking for in the exhibition." When the call ended, Octavia remained motionless for several minutes. What had begun as an act of destruction was now becoming an unexpected opportunity, a new path. She thought of Eleanor, of how her absence had triggered this entire story, of how, paradoxically, the wound that her departure had left in Thaddeus had eventually opened doors for Octavia. With renewed energy, she continued packing. But this time she didn't feel she was fleeing from an untenable situation, but advancing toward a future that, though uncertain, contained possibilities she never would have imagined when she spilled that red wine on Thaddeus's tuxedo. Wounds, she reflected as she closed her suitcase, are sometimes just the beginning of something new, not the end of what was. Boston in spring was exactly as Octavia had imagined in her dreams, a symphony of brick and green, wide avenues that flowed into surprising squares, the Charles River reflecting the changing sky, and the air imbued with history and possibilities. Her small apartment in Cambridge, a third-floor walk-up in a Victorian building, had high ceilings with exposed beams and a window that perfectly framed the city skyline. The space was modest but luminous, ideal for an artist beginning her training in the city that had nurtured so many great names in American art. The first days were a whirlwind of administrative procedures, tours of the Massachusetts College of Art and Design, and the vertigo of finally being where she had so long dreamed. Octavia immersed herself in the routine with enthusiasm, attending painting technique classes in the morning and exploring the city in the afternoons, her sketchbook always at hand. In New York, her exhibition continued to generate comments, especially after the incident with the damaged painting. Bennett kept her informed through messages that she read with a mixture of interest and distance, as if that life in New York belonged to someone else. Thaddeus, faithful to his promise to respect her space, limited himself to brief weekly emails, politely asking about her progress and sharing some news about the foundation that now bore Eleanor's name. He never mentioned Diana or Malcolm, although Octavia knew from comments by Penelope that Diana's brother had initiated legal actions questioning the validity of the foundation. The physical letters that Thaddeus sent, however, remained unopened on her desk. There was something about those elegant envelopes, about the subtle aroma of bergamot they emitted, that Octavia didn't feel ready to confront. They were a tangible reminder of the complexity of their relationship, of the implicit expectations that still hovered between them. One April afternoon, while drawing the Trinity Church from a little frequented corner near Copley Square, Octavia noticed a woman observing her with interest from across the street. Something in her posture, in the way she slightly tilted her head, seemed disturbingly familiar to her. When their gazes crossed, the woman quickly moved away, losing herself among the passers-by. Octavia put away her sketchbook and ran to the spot, but when she arrived, there was no trace of the mysterious observer. That night, while preparing a simple risotto in the small kitchen of her apartment, the phone rang. It was Imogen Fielding, the gallery owner who had contacted her before her departure. "Octavia, dear, how is your adaptation to our beautiful city going?" she asked with her characteristic musical accent. "Every day I fall more in love with Boston," Octavia responded sincerely. "It's as if the city nourishes my creativity in ways I've never experienced before." "Wonderful." The satisfaction was evident in Imogen's voice. "I'm calling because your painting, Absence in Blue, arrived today from New York. It's even more impactful in person than in the photographs. The Art and Resilience exhibition opens in 3 weeks, and I'd like you to be present, of course." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," assured Octavia. "Who else will be exhibiting?" "Artists from all over the country who have transformed destruction into creation," explained Imogen. "And there's someone in particular that I think you'll be interested in meeting. A young woman from New York who's been in Boston for several years, working under the pseudonym The Absent One. Her works have a fascinating dialogue with yours, although she has never exhibited in New York." Something in the description made Octavia's heart quicken. "Can I see her work before the exhibition?" she asked, trying to keep her voice from betraying her sudden unease. "Of course, come by the gallery tomorrow. We're setting up the works and you can see them all." That night Octavia could barely sleep. The woman in the street, the mysterious New York artist who never exhibited in her state. Could it be a coincidence, Or had she, without seeking it, followed Eleanor's trail to Boston? The next morning, at the Institute of Contemporary Art, a contemporary space installed in a beautifully restored old building, Imogen guided her through rooms in the midst of the mounting process. "Your work will be here," she pointed to a prominent space in the main room, "and here those of the absent one." Octavia was left breathless upon seeing the canvases. They were apparently conventional urban landscapes, but each contained a female figure, with her back turned, almost identical in posture to her own self-portrait in Absence in Blue. The technique was unmistakable. The same treatment of light, the same way of capturing shadows. "Who is she?" asked Octavia with a barely audible voice. "What's her real name?" Imogen looked at her with curiosity. "She prefers to maintain her anonymity," she responded. "I only know that she arrived in Boston about 5 years ago after abandoning her studies in New York. Initially, she worked as a restorer but gradually began to develop her own work. She's very reserved about her life in New York. 5 years, New York, restoration." Each detail confirmed Octavia's growing suspicion. "Do you have any way to contact her?" "Just an email that she almost never responds to," said Imogen, increasingly intrigued by Octavia's interest. "Do you know her?" "I don't know," Octavia responded honestly. "But I think I know someone who has been desperately looking for her for 5 years." Back in her apartment, Octavia sat before the pile of unopened letters from Thaddeus. One by one, she began to open and read them. They were not, as she had feared, attempts at manipulation or reminders of her debt to him. They were sincere reflections on art, on his own mistakes as a father, on his hope that Eleanor was, like Octavia now, pursuing her dreams somewhere. In the most recent letter, Thaddeus mentioned something that made Octavia stop abruptly. "I've been reviewing old photographs of Eleanor. I found one from her 17th birthday, where she appears with a necklace I gave her, a small painter's palette in silver, with her name engraved on the back. She wore it always, even the day she left. I wonder if she still keeps it, if it still means something to her." Octavia remembered the woman in the street, the metallic glint she had briefly seen on her neck when she leaned over the railing. With trembling fingers, she looked for Thaddeus's number in her phone but stopped before dialing. What right did she have to intervene in this story? If Eleanor had chosen to disappear, to create a new identity away from her family, wouldn't she be betraying her will by revealing her whereabouts? On the other hand, Thaddeus's pain, his sincere regret, didn't they at least deserve the opportunity for reconciliation? Instead of calling, Octavia took her sketchbook and began to draw frenetically. For hours she traced and erased, trying to capture on paper the turbulence of her thoughts. When she finally stopped, dawn was breaking. Before her she had created the sketch for a new work. 2 women with their backs turned in front of an easel, their silhouettes almost identical but subtly different, like imperfect reflections in an antique mirror. The title formed in her mind with crystalline clarity. 2 absences, 1 void. At that moment, Octavia understood that she had found her true artistic voice, not in the unconscious imitation of Eleanor's style, but in the exploration of that strange bond that united them without ever having met. And she also knew that she had a decision to make, perhaps the most important since she had accepted Thaddeus's proposal that night in the mansion. The inauguration of Art and Resilience transformed the Institute of Contemporary Art into a hive of critics, collectors, and artists. Under the warm light of lamps specifically designed to enhance each work, Octavia toured the rooms, occasionally stopping to explain her work to those interested, but with her attention divided between her own success and the constant surveillance of the entrance. Her absence in blue, with its dramatic scar traversing the canvas and the subsequent intervention that integrated it into the work, had generated immediate interest. The story behind the piece, discreetly narrated in the accompanying label, added a layer of intrigue that fascinated visitors. "It's extraordinary how you've transformed an act of vandalism into an artistic element," commented an influential critic, studying the details of the cut with almost scientific attention. "Was it difficult to make the decision not to restore it?" "Restoration would have erased the truth of what happened," replied Octavia. "I prefer to integrate my wounds rather than hide them under layers of apparent perfection." The critic nodded appreciatively, noting something in his notebook before moving away. Octavia took advantage of the moment to approach Imogen, who was animatedly conversing with a group of potential buyers. "Has she arrived?" she asked quietly when she managed a moment alone with the gallery owner. Imogen shook her head. "Not yet, but she confirmed her attendance. You know how she is. She'll arrive when we least expect it." The wait extended for more than an hour. Octavia alternated between conversations with guests and furtive glances toward the entrance, her anxiety growing with each passing minute. She had made a decision, but its execution depended entirely on the absent one appearing. Finally, shortly after 9, a movement at the entrance caught her attention. A slender woman with brown hair pulled into a low bun, dressed with simple elegance in grey tones, entered the gallery discreetly. Even from a distance, Octavia recognized the bearing, the way of moving that she had briefly seen at Copley Square. With her heart beating rapidly, Octavia made her way toward her, dodging conversation groups and wishing her legs wouldn't betray her at this crucial moment. "Eleanor," she said when she was close enough, her voice barely a whisper. The woman stopped abruptly, her eyes, the same deep brown as Octavia's, opening with surprise and alarm. For an instant, she seemed about to flee, but something in Octavia's expression stopped her. "How do you know?" she began, her voice trembling. "Your father told me about you," Octavia responded softly. "Although he doesn't know you're here. No one knows except me now." Eleanor, or the absent one, as she called herself, looked around nervously, as if checking that no one else had heard. "Did he send you to look for me?" she asked with a mixture of wariness and vulnerability. "No," assured Octavia. "Finding you was a coincidence. I came to Boston to study, thanks to a scholarship from the foundation that bears your name." Eleanor visibly paled. "A foundation with my name," she repeated, incredulous. "My father created a foundation to support young artists," confirmed Octavia. "After you left, he found your diary, where you expressed the wish that he would help others with dreams like yours." A complex succession of emotions crossed Eleanor's face: surprise, bewilderment, and finally, a spark of what could be hope. "I thought he would never read that diary," she murmured, more to herself than to Octavia. "I left it on purpose, but I was convinced he would ignore it, as he ignored everything I considered important." Imogen approached them, momentarily interrupting the conversation. "Ah, I see you've already met," she exclaimed, pleased. "I knew your works had fascinating stylistic connections. Did you know each other before?" "We have mutual friends," Octavia quickly responded. "From New York." "Wonderful," smiled Imogen. "I'll leave you to catch up. The critics are fascinated with your works, by the way. I foresee great sales tonight." When the gallery owner moved away, Eleanor looked intensely at Octavia. "We need to talk in private," she said firmly. "Not here." They found refuge on a small terrace at the back of the gallery, a quiet space that contrasted with the bustle of the exhibition rooms. The Boston night was mild, the air perfumed with jasmine, and the distant sounds of the city formed a discreet backdrop for their conversation. "I've seen you before," began Eleanor, leaning on the stone railing, "at Copley Square and a couple of times near the college. At first I thought it was a coincidence, the physical resemblance, but then I saw your style so similar to mine. It was unsettling." "It is for me, too," admitted Octavia. "Discovering that there's someone so similar to me, not just physically but in the way of expressing artistically, almost as if we shared something deeper than appearance," completed Eleanor. "A sensibility, a way of seeing the world." A contemplative silence settled between them, as each processed the strangeness of their encounter. "My father never mentioned that he had a sister," Eleanor finally said, "but our resemblance is undeniable." Octavia shook her head. "We are not sisters, at least not biologically. I met your father by chance, at an event where I was working as a waitress. I spilled wine on his suit," she added with an ironic smile. "When he saw my paintings, he decided to sponsor me. Only later did I discover that part of his interest was due to our amazing resemblance." Eleanor nodded slowly, as if the pieces of a puzzle were beginning to fit together. "And what do you want from me?" she asked directly. "Are you going to tell my father where I am?" "That depends on you," Octavia responded with sincerity. "I have no right to interfere in your decisions, but I think you should know some things before deciding." During the next half hour, Octavia told her everything: the change in Thaddeus after her departure, the creation of the foundation, Malcolm's attempts to sabotage his initiatives, even the attack on the painting that was now part of the exhibition. Your mother has changed too, added Octavia. When she learned about the foundation, I saw in her a glimmer of reconciliation, I suppose, as if she finally understood how important you were to your father. Eleanor listened in silence, her expression indecipherable in the dim light of the terrace. Why does this matter so much to you? She finally asked. Why involve yourself in a family story that isn't yours? The question caught Octavia by surprise, but she answered honestly, At first, out of gratitude. Your father gave me the opportunity of a lifetime. Then, when I discovered the truth about you, I felt a strange responsibility, as if fate had placed me in this position for some reason. And now, she hesitated, searching for the exact words. Now I think that maybe I can be a bridge between your past and your present, between what you left behind and what you've built here. Eleanor observed her for a long time, as if evaluating her sincerity. 5 years, she said finally. 5 years building a new life, an identity separate from the weight of being the daughter of. I can't simply return and pretend nothing has changed. No one is asking you to return, clarified Octavia. Just to consider the possibility of contact on your terms. A letter, a message, something that would let them know you're well, that you've found your path. Eleanor unconsciously touched the small palette-shaped pendant she wore around her neck, the same one Thaddeus had mentioned in his letter. I'll think about it, she said finally. I can't promise more than that for now. When they returned to the gallery, a new silent understanding had been established between them. Eleanor formally introduced Octavia to several Boston artists, opening doors for her in this new world with a generosity that contrasted with her initial wariness. Before parting at the end of the night, they exchanged phone numbers. Whatever your decision, said Octavia, I'd like us to stay in touch. Not as the daughter of and the protégé of, but as two artists who, by some strange synchronicity, share more than a physical resemblance. Eleanor smiled for the first time, a smile that transformed her face and made her appear younger, freer. I'd like that, she responded. After all, we're the only ones who can truly understand what it means to live with this strange connection. As she watched Eleanor walk away, Octavia felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. She had found not only Thaddeus's lost daughter, but also perhaps someone who could become an unexpected ally in her own artistic journey. The circle, somehow, was beginning to close. The following months passed for Octavia in a succession of discoveries, both artistic and personal. Her studies at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design flourished under the tutelage of masters, who recognized in her an uncommon talent, while her friendship with Eleanor deepened through long conversations in cafes near Boston Common or walks down Commonwealth Avenue. Gradually, the two strangely similar young women began to develop joint projects, a series of diptychs titled Dialogues, where each responded artistically to the other's work, creating a visual exchange that fascinated critics and gallery owners. Imogen, delighted with this unexpected collaboration, was already planning an exclusive exhibition for the following fall. Two Voices, One Echo would be the title, playing with the mysterious connection between both artists that the public found so intriguing. One July afternoon, while sharing ice cream in Boston Common, Eleanor finally broached the topic they had been avoiding for weeks. I wrote a letter to my father, she said with a serene voice, though Octavia noticed how her fingers pressed more firmly on the plastic spoon. I don't tell him exactly where I am, but I talk about my work, my life here, and about you. Octavia looked at her in surprise. About me? I tell him that I've met you, that we're collaborating artistically, explained Eleanor. I thank him for the foundation, for what he's doing for young artists like us. She paused, contemplating the imposing trees that dominated the park, eternal symbols of endurance and renewal. I tell him I'm not ready to see him yet, but that maybe someday, her voice broke slightly, maybe someday we can talk directly, without intermediaries. Octavia took her hand across the table, a gesture of silent support that Eleanor thanked with a light pressure of her fingers. It's a first step, said Octavia softly. A bridge you're beginning to build. A bridge you helped design, responded Eleanor with a faint smile. Without you, I probably would never have considered resuming contact. At that moment, while the afternoon sun gilded the buildings surrounding them, Octavia understood that her role in this story was more complex and significant than she had initially imagined. She wasn't simply the beneficiary of Thaddeus's generosity, nor the symbolic substitute for his lost daughter. She was, somehow, a catalyst who had set in motion a healing process that went far beyond her own artistic career. "When will you send the letter?" she asked. "I already sent it," Eleanor replied. "It should be arriving in New York these days." The news provoked an immediate impulse in Octavia. That night, for the first time in months, she called Thaddeus. When he answered, his voice sounded distant, as if speaking from the bottom of a well. "Octavia? What a pleasant surprise," he said. "I was just thinking about you." "Is everything all right?" she asked, perceiving something strange in his tone. A prolonged silence preceded his response. "I received a letter today from Eleanor." "Oh," Octavia tried to sound surprised. "That's wonderful, isn't it?" "It's like a miracle," he responded, his voice breaking slightly. "After 5 years of silence, she mentions that you've met, that you're collaborating artistically." "It's true," confirmed Octavia, feeling that it no longer made sense to hide this part of the truth. "We met by chance at an exhibition." "Her work is extraordinary, Thaddeus." "It always was." The paternal pride was evident in his voice. "How is she?" "In the letter, she says she's well, but you've seen her. Is she happy?" The question, so simple and yet so profound, moved Octavia. "Yes, she is happy," she responded sincerely. "She's found her place, her artistic voice. She's respected in the cultural circles here." "Thank you," murmured Thaddeus. "You don't know what it means to me to know that." Octavia wanted to add that Eleanor still wore the palette-shaped pendant that he had given her, that she sometimes spoke of her childhood with nostalgia, that she kept family photographs hidden in a drawer, but she restrained herself. These details belonged to Eleanor, and only she had the right to share them when she was ready. "There's something else," added Thaddeus after a pause. "Malcolm has withdrawn the lawsuit against the foundation. Apparently, Diana finally intervened. Eleanor's letter affected her deeply." The news pleased Octavia. Another knot beginning to untie, another wound beginning to heal. "I'm glad," she said simply. "The foundation is important, not just for me, but for many young artists who need that opportunity." "Will you come to New York for the fall exhibition?" asked Thaddeus. "The foundation will organize an important event, and I'd like you to present your recent work." Octavia hesitated. Returning to New York would mean facing again everything she had left behind. The curious glances, the rumors, the crossed expectations that had been woven around her relationship with Thaddeus. "I don't know," she responded honestly. "Here I'm building something new, an identity of my own, separate from me," he completed, with the understanding that surprised her. "I understand perfectly, Octavia. It's exactly what Eleanor needed to do. What I, in my selfishness, failed to see then." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, centered on practical matters and news from New York. When they said goodbye, Octavia felt that something had subtly changed between them. It was no longer the asymmetrical relationship between a powerful benefactor and a dependent young artist, but a more balanced bond, based on mutual respect and a shared past that, though complex, no longer weighed like a slab on their interactions. That night, as she contemplated the lights of Boston from her apartment window, Octavia began to sketch a new project. It wouldn't be part of Dialogues, the joint series with Eleanor, but something completely personal, a triptych titled Transformations. The first canvas would represent the moment of the spilled wine, that crucial instant where everything had begun. The second would capture her arrival in Boston, the threshold of a new life. And the third remained to be defined, like the future itself that now stretched before her, full of possibilities that were no longer limited by others' expectations or roles assigned in stories that didn't fully belong to her. As her hands gave form to the first lines of the sketch, Octavia understood that she was finally painting her own story. Autumn arrived in Boston with a symphony of ochres and coppers that transformed the parks and squares into living canvases. For Octavia, who had never experienced the change of seasons in a city so sensitive to chromatic nuances, each day offered new inspirations, new combinations of light and shadow that she yearned to capture on her canvases. Her collaboration with Eleanor had evolved into a deep friendship, based not only on their strange physical and artistic resemblance, but on a mutual understanding that transcended the circumstances that had united them. Together they explored ancient techniques in restoration workshops, shared discoveries in hidden galleries, and occasionally, when words weren't enough, communicated through their paintings, in a visual dialogue that only they fully understood. The formal invitation for the exhibition in New York arrived in a thick envelope with the Eleanor Winters Foundation logo, gold on cobalt blue background, a stylized painter's palette surrounded by a delicate vignette. Inside, besides the invitation itself, was a handwritten note from Thaddeus. Dear Octavia, the exhibition will be a tribute to the young talents that the Foundation has supported in this first year, but also a celebration of new beginnings. Diana will collaborate as a guest curator, an unexpected bridge that we are beginning to rebuild. I understand perfectly if you prefer not to come. Your career in Boston is flourishing, and New York represents a chapter that perhaps you wish to keep closed. But if you decide to join us, it wouldn't be as my protege, but as the brilliant and independent artist you have become. With affection and sincere admiration, Thaddeus. Octavia reread the note several times, noting the subtle changes in Thaddeus's tone, the absence of the implicit pressure that used to accompany his communications. It seemed that he too had experienced his own transformation during these months. That afternoon, she shared the invitation with Eleanor while they had coffee on the terrace of her apartment, with views of the city beginning to be tinged with the colors of autumn. "Will you go?" asked Eleanor, studying her friend's face attentively. "I don't know," Octavia responded, playing with the spoon of her espresso. "On one hand, it would be an opportunity to show my recent work in New York, for them to see how I've evolved. On the other, you fear they'll still see you as Thaddeus's girl, the symbolic substitute for the lost daughter," completed Eleanor with the insight that characterized her. Octavia nodded, silently grateful that her friend understood her doubts so well. "What if you don't go alone?" Eleanor suddenly suggested, her eyes shining with a spark that Octavia had learned to recognize as a sign of an important idea. "What if we go together?" The proposal left Octavia momentarily speechless. "You? Return to New York? But you always said that I wasn't ready," completed Eleanor. "And for years, it was true. But since I began exchanging letters with my father, something has changed. I no longer feel that anger, that visceral rejection of everything I left behind." She stood and walked to the edge of the terrace, contemplating the panorama while organizing her thoughts. "My mother's last letter arrived 3 days ago," she continued, turning to Octavia. "She tells me that she and my father are trying to rebuild, if not their romantic relationship, at least a friendship based on mutual respect. For me, she says, for the possibility that someday I might return to their lives, even if occasionally." The news surprised Octavia. In all her conversations with Thaddeus, he had never mentioned this rapprochement with Diana. "And how do you feel about that?" she asked softly. Eleanor smiled, a smile that mixed melancholy and hope. "Confused, moved, frightened," she admitted. "For years I built my new identity in opposition to them, especially to my father. The absent one wasn't just an artistic pseudonym, it was a declaration of independence." She paused, instinctively touching the palette-shaped pendant she never removed. "But now I wonder if true independence wouldn't consist precisely in being able to return on my own terms, without fear of losing myself again in their expectations." Octavia approached her friend and took her hands in her own, a gesture that had become natural between them. "If you decide to go, I'll be by your side," she promised. "And if you change your mind at the last moment, I'll understand perfectly." During the following weeks, preparations for the trip occupied much of their time. They carefully selected the works they would present. Octavia, her triptych Transformations and some works from her Boston series. Eleanor, a new collection titled Returns, which explored the concept of returning to one's origin from multiple perspectives. They agreed not to announce Eleanor's presence beforehand. It would be a surprise, an unexpected gift for Thaddeus and Diana, but also a way to maintain control over the moment and circumstances of the reunion. The night before the trip, while arranging the last details, Eleanor suddenly stopped as if assailed by a crucial doubt. "Are we doing the right thing?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "What if all this is a mistake? If by returning I destroy the peace I've built here?" Octavia looked at her for a long time, recognizing in her eyes the same fear she had felt when she decided to accept Thaddeus's proposal, when she chose to come to Boston, when she dared to contact Eleanor after discovering her identity. "There are no decisions without risk," she finally responded. "But sometimes it's precisely the steps that frighten us most that lead us to our greatest transformations." Eleanor nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in those words. "Then New York," she said, raising her teacup in an improvised toast. "For returns that aren't regressions, but spirals that take us to a similar point yet higher up. For transformations that don't destroy us, but reveal us," completed Octavia, joining her cup to her friends. Outside, the Boston night enveloped the city in a mantle of stars, while inside the small apartment, two women united by fate and art prepared for the journey that, without knowing it yet, would mark the beginning of a new chapter in their intertwined lives. The decision was made, the circle ready to complete itself. New York received them with a crystalline luminosity, that intense blue of its autumn sky that Octavia had forgotten during her stay in the more silvery light of Boston. As the taxi carried them from the airport to the hotel in Manhattan, both maintained a contemplative silence, each immersed in her own thoughts and memories. For Octavia, the buildings and streets paraded like scenes from a previous life that now seemed to belong to someone else. For Eleanor, who hadn't set foot in her native city in 5 years, each corner, each square, provoked a contradictory mixture of familiarity and strangeness. "It's curious," Eleanor finally commented as they crossed Central Park. "I've imagined this moment so many times, and yet I don't feel as I expected." "And how do you feel?" asked Octavia, closely observing her friend's profile silhouetted against the window. Eleanor reflected for a moment before responding, "Like I'm visiting a place I know from a dream, familiar and alien at the same time." She paused, contemplating the skyscrapers rising in the distance. "But I don't feel the weight I feared. It's liberating." The hotel, a discreet but elegant establishment in Soho, had been reserved by the Foundation. Upon checking in, Octavia noticed they had anticipated only one room, unaware they would be accompanied. "There's no problem," assured the receptionist when informed of the situation. "We have a suite available that you can share, or if you prefer privacy, I can assign you separate rooms." They opted for the suite, a spacious area with 2 bedrooms connected by a common living room that offered views of the Manhattan skyline. While unpacking, Octavia sent a message to Thaddeus, confirming her arrival but without mentioning Eleanor. The response arrived almost immediately. "Welcome to New York. If it's all right with you, I'll come by to pick you up for dinner. There's someone who wants to meet you." Octavia showed the message to Eleanor, who read it with an indecipherable expression. "Do you think he's referring to my mother?" she asked, her voice betraying a nervousness that her face tried to hide. "It's likely," replied Octavia. "Are you ready to see them tonight? We can postpone if you prefer to acclimate first." Eleanor walked to the window, contemplating the New York sunset that tinged the buildings with a golden pink. "No," she said finally, with a determination that surprised Octavia. "If we postpone, I'll only get more nervous. Let's do this tonight, with the spontaneity of a not completely planned encounter." When Thaddeus arrived at the hotel, Octavia went down alone to the lobby. The man who awaited her, impeccably dressed as always but with a more relaxed air than she remembered, received her with a warm embrace that reflected genuine affection. "You look radiant," he said, observing her with paternal admiration. "Boston has been wonderful for you." "It's been transformative," she confirmed, smiling, "in all possible ways." They headed toward a car that waited outside, but before getting in, Octavia stopped. "Before we go, there's something I must tell you," she began, carefully choosing her words. "I didn't come alone." Thaddeus looked at her with curiosity. "Your friend Penelope?" "She'll be welcome, of course." "It's not Penelope," Octavia replied, taking a deep breath. "It's someone I met in Boston, someone who very much wants to see you, although also a bit afraid." Understanding gradually illuminated Thaddeus's face, while his eyes filled with an emotion contained for years. "Is it?" he began, not daring to complete the question. Octavia nodded. "She's upstairs, in our suite. If you prefer, we can change plans and—" But Thaddeus was already heading toward the hotel entrance, with steps that tried to maintain composure but revealed his urgency. Octavia followed him, quickly sending a message to Eleanor. "We're coming up. He's emotional." The ascent in the elevator seemed eternal. Thaddeus, usually so eloquent, remained silent, as if fearing that any word could break the spell of this unexpected moment. When Octavia opened the door to the suite, Eleanor was standing by the window, her silhouette outlined against the city lights that were beginning to turn on. Hearing them enter, she turned slowly. Father and daughter looked at each other in silence, separated by 5 years and a few meters, that seemed to contain an entire universe of unspoken words, lost moments, regrets, and hopes. "Dad," Eleanor finally said, her voice barely a whisper. That simple word seemed to unleash something in Thaddeus. He advanced toward her, and after a moment of hesitation, enveloped her in an embrace that expressed everything words couldn't. The pain of absence, the joy of reunion, the regret for lost time. Octavia, feeling that her presence was an intrusion in this intimate moment, discreetly headed toward the door. But before she could leave, Eleanor called to her. "Octavia, stay," she asked, extending a hand to her while still in her father's embrace. "You are part of this story. Without you, this moment wouldn't exist." The three dined that night at a small restaurant near the hotel, a discreet place where they could talk without interruptions. Diana joined them, her arrival marked by a moment of initial tension that quickly gave way to an emotion that not even her elegant composure could completely hide. The conversation flowed with surprising naturalness, jumping from trivial topics to deep reflections, from anecdotes of the lost years to tentative plans for the future. There were no explicit reproaches, though apologies were subtly interwoven in everyone's words. "We never stopped looking for you," confessed Diana at one point, her fingers lightly brushing her daughter's hand. "But perhaps we didn't know where to look." "And I never stopped carrying you with me," responded Eleanor, touching the palette-shaped pendant that rested on her neck. "Though I needed to find myself first." "You've succeeded," affirmed Thaddeus, with evident pride. "We've seen your work, it's extraordinary." "As is Octavia's," added Diana, directing a look of genuine appreciation toward the young woman. "The Foundation has found 2 exceptional artists to begin its journey." As the evening progressed, Octavia observed the interaction of this family in the process of reconstituting itself, marveling at the unexpected turns life could take. What had begun with an accident, with red wine spilled on an impeccable tuxedo, had triggered a series of events that now culminated in this moment of reconciliation. The exhibition, inaugurated 2 days later in New York's most prestigious gallery, was a resounding success. The unexpected presence of Eleanor, or the absent one, as she was known in artistic circles, generated a media stir that attracted critics, collectors, and the curious alike. Octavia's triptych Transformations occupied a central place, visually dialoguing with Eleanor's series Returns. Together, the works told a story of loss and reunion, of identities built and rebuilt, of paths that separate only to converge again at a higher point of the spiral. During the reception, while Octavia conversed with a group of art students who observed her with the same admiration with which she had looked at established artists in her waitressing days, she noticed Thaddeus, Diana, and Eleanor gathered in front of one of her paintings. The three contemplated the work with absorbed expressions, unknowingly forming a composition that any painter would have yearned to capture. 3 figures united by art and blood, their silhouettes outlined against the directed light that illuminated the canvas. Penelope, who had attended the inauguration accompanied by her new boyfriend, approached Octavia with 2 flutes of champagne. "If someone had told me a year ago that we would be here, celebrating your exhibition alongside Thaddeus Winters's lost daughter, I would have thought they read too many novels," she commented, handing her one of the flutes. "Reality surpasses fiction, huh?" "And we're just beginning the 2nd chapter," replied Octavia, toasting with her friend. "Or perhaps the 3rd, depending on how we tell the story." At the end of the night, when most of the guests had departed and only a few people remained conversing in small groups, Thaddeus approached Octavia, who was pensively observing her triptych. "There's something I want to show you," he said, guiding her to an adjacent room that had remained closed during the inauguration. Inside, a single painting occupied the central wall, a portrait of Octavia painted by Eleanor, and next to it, a portrait of Eleanor painted by Octavia. Both works, created in secret during their time in Boston, complemented each other perfectly, creating an almost mirror-like effect that captured the strange connection between the two artists. "Eleanor asked me to reserve it for the end of the night," explained Thaddeus. "It's her gift to you and to me too, I suppose." "Non-identical reflections," read Octavia on the plaque accompanying the double work, "a perfect title." "That's what you are," reflected Thaddeus, "not substitutions or replacements, but reflections that in their difference reveal something essential about the other." Octavia nodded, perfectly understanding the concept. "For a long time I worried about being seen only as a replacement, an alternative version of her," she confessed. "But now I see that our resemblance was just the beginning of a much more complex and beautiful story. A story that will continue to unfold," added Thaddeus. "Diana and I have been talking. We want to expand the foundation, create an exchange program between New York and Boston. Eleanor would direct it from there if you wanted to collaborate from here." The proposal surprised Octavia. "Return to New York? I hadn't considered it." "You don't have to decide now," he quickly clarified. "It's just a possibility, a door that remains open. Your place is where you decide it to be." That night, while packing her belongings for the return to Boston scheduled for the next day, Octavia reflected on the multiple transformations she had experienced since that event at the Plaza Hotel, from waitress to recognized artist, from protégé to collaborator on equal terms, from symbolic substitute to person valued for herself. The journey had been unexpected, full of surprising turns and painful discoveries, but also of beauty and growth. As in any good journey, she had lost some things along the way, innocence perhaps, or certain illusions about herself and others. But she had gained much more, confidence, clarity, and authentic connections that transcended the circumstances that had originated them. As she closed her suitcase, her gaze fell on a small sketch she had begun that very morning. A young woman herself, standing before a blank canvas, with the serene face of someone who knows exactly what she wants to create. Provisional title: The Canvas of Our Lives. At that moment, Octavia understood that the true work of art was life itself, a canvas painted day by day with decisions large and small, with fortuitous encounters and necessary farewells, with mistakes that transformed into opportunities, and wounds that eventually blossomed into strengths. And most importantly, she understood that she was the artist of her own story, now free to trace her path without the weight of others' expectations or roles assigned by others. The future stretched before her like a blank canvas, not terrifying in its emptiness, but exciting in its infinite possibilities. And this time it would be she who decided the colors, the forms, the lights, and the shadows. As New York slept under a starry sky, Octavia smiled at the certainty that, regardless of the path she chose, New York, Boston, or perhaps a completely new destination, she would travel it with the confidence of someone who had learned to transform accidents into opportunities, scars into beauty, and endings into new beginnings.